Hello, guys and gals, and this is part 20 of our reading of Guinevere by Sharan Newman. As always, we are going to go over the copyright information. This book is copyright 1981 by Sharan Newman. I have the author's permission, written permission to read this book on my YouTube channel. Anyways, in the last part, Guinevere and Mark were returned back to the villa, to their home, and news came across that they were going to put Alswitha on trial because the vow was broken, and so it was to be decided what was to be done. Anyways, Mark and Guinevere went with Cador and Merlin and Arthur and Leodegrance and Gwendolyn to the council meeting. And Mark basically wants to marry Alswitha. And basically Arthur set the price of Alswitha's release to the weight of his sword and shield in gold. And while Leodegrance offered, Alswitha is apparently going to try and do that herself, so that she can willingly accepts Mark. So, anyways, let's go. Okay. The lords were quiet, each one trying to compute his possible share. Arthur decided to take their silence as approval. Very well, he stated. It is agreed. Mark, can you pay this amount for her? Leodegrance stood. I will guarantee the sum of gold for my son. He shall have it from his share of my estate. No, Alswitha spoke for the first time to them all. I can pay my own price. No one will say I had to be purchased. I come to him willingly. She began fumbling with her brooches and the gold clasp on her braids. One by one, she pulled off the gold rings and bracelets, her armbands and ankle clasps. She even laid her gold leaf-covered shoes on the pile next to Arthur's shield. At last she stood barefoot, clad in her shift and cape, with a heavy heap of gold before her. I don't think that will be enough, Arthur said sadly. You still have the weight of my sword to match. Alswitha lifted the sword. It was steel and heavier than she thought. She thought a moment and then removed her cape and placed it in Arthur's lap. This is worth more than all the gold before you, she said. It was stitched from the feathers of 1,000 swans, for the marriage of my great-grandmother to the king of the Geats. There is not another one in the world. Arthur stroked it. He had never felt anything so soft before. Before anyone could protest, he consented. Done. I take this for my share, and the rest of you may divide as you will. I suggest that you let Master Merlin help you make the division equal. He dismissed the assembly simply by rising from the chair and turning his back on it. Merlin beamed approval of his protege. Arthur was just glad that the whole thing was over. He wondered if Guinevere thought he had been too harsh or too lenient, or if she had been watching him at all. He saw that she was with Alswitha and Mark. She was trying to wrap Alswitha in a spare blanket, and Alswitha was explaining that she wasn't shivering from the cold. It was only the relief. The formal meeting had dissolved into confusion. Everyone was talking at once. The lords were busy examining the gold and fighting over their shares, and no longer paid any attention to Alswitha or Mark. Leodegrance and Gwendolyn watched the commotion without interest. Their thoughts were on Mark and the bride he had apparently chosen. We've had him back only such a short time, Gwendolyn protested. I'm not even sure we had him back at all, my love. Arthur has told me that Mark did not even wish to see us again, that he is so bitter that he hates everyone, not just those who hurt him. I have watched him constantly, the little time he has been with us. Arthur is right. He is disgusted with all men, with life itself. Who knows what it will take to make him want to join us again. We have seen men like that before, in the old days, when everything seemed to be crashing around us at once. That dinner, when the Saxons invited all the great men of the realm and then slaughtered them. We were sick with grief and anger, but we didn't want to die too. We fought back even when our whole life was slipping away from us, and all those of our elders whom we love had been slain. But do you remember Lucius? He was a man of sanity and reason, one of the most brilliant scholars I have ever known. You remember what he did when he heard that Theodoric had taken Rome? Gwendolyn shuddered. Poison in the wine glass. He couldn't bear to live with a barbarian in control of Rome. And dear gentle Monica went mad when she heard her husband had died and murdered her own children rather than let them grow up in such a world. Why do you remind me of this now? Mark should not do such a thing. Oh, Mark would not do such a thing. I'm not sure. I see them staring at me out of Mark's eyes. My poor son. He was always the dreamer, the one who believed. He was the only one who understood why we had to fight. Matthew was my grandfather again, never happy unless he was in some kind of conflict. And John, we named him well. He was loving to despair, but they died and Mark lived, and he has had all these years to ponder and brood on it. We must not oppose him in this, Gwendolyn, or he may leave us again forever. Gwendolyn knew that he was right. Leodegrance had always been a sure judge of their sons' minds, but to have this girl as her daughter-in-law, always reminding one of old wounds. Gwendolyn was not ready to cope with that yet, but she's a heathen, Leodegrance. She must be baptized and instructed in the faith before they are married. You don't think Mark could object to that? We must ask him, dearest. We might even ask her. She's surprised everyone, I think, except Sidra, by knowing our language. Perhaps she will be more receptive to our way of life than we think. Perhaps, Gwendolyn sighed. But whatever she does, she still cannot change her face. Nevertheless, she resolved to be as kind to Alswitha as she could, and spoke hopefully that evening when they were gathered in Guinevere's room of returning soon to the villa and preparing a proper wedding. Alswitha was upset with the suddenness with which her old family was taken from her forever, and this new one supplied. At the council, she had felt only relief and gratitude to Mark, and the joy of finding him again. She had had a confused idea of an idyllic life in a little wood hut deep in the forest, just the two of them. It had never occurred to her that he might have a family too. Now it seemed that they must be considered before she did anything. Mark was apparently related to every British family on the island, and this one beside her, who rather frightened her, was proposing to invite all of them to see her married. Guinevere sat at her other side, listening and nodding as if it were all quite natural. Alswitha smiled and nodded and agreed with everything that was said, but she felt as if a giant cage were slowly being lowered over her head. Her nervousness continued to grow over the next few days as she became more fully aware of Mark's place in his society. She had not paid much attention to the customs at the castle. There had not been much difference between the table manners of Cador and the ones of her own hall. She had not had much conversation with anyone except Guinevere and Giraldus. Now everyone wanted to speak with her. She found she was being treated with patronizing condescension by the women who had sneered at her before. She was touted as a heroine who was giving up heathen ways for the true religion. But from the way they carried on, she wasn't sure if the true religion was something one believed or something one did. Mark saw her panic but felt helpless. He longed simply to sweep her up and carry her away to that little hut in the woods, but logic told him that food and clothing must somehow be provided also, and that huts were very cold in the winter. In his life and hers, someone else had always done the providing. He needed a plan, and until he worked one out, they would have to remain. Arthur certainly sympathized with Mark's wish to be able to carry off his love and court her in some remote place, far from prying eyes and listening ears. Every sight he had of her convinced him that she was the only woman he wanted, and she would make a far better queen than he would a king, and that all he wanted was to tell her so and be married as soon as possible. But how could he do this when she was always surrounded by people? If she wasn't with her mother or the other women, then she was off somewhere laughing with Gawain or Giraldus. He realized now that neither one of them had any romantic notions about her. Although how any man could keep from falling in love with her was beyond his understanding. He glumly forced himself to admit that he hadn't made the most of his chances either. So much had happened since he had rescued her that he was almost afraid she had forgotten it. She hadn't mentioned the matter, and he didn't see any way of bringing it up. The few times he had been close enough to her for speech, he had fumbled and stuttered like a schoolboy. In consequence, he was even more brusque and short with the lords and the soldiers who had come with him. He even fought with C, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, C, who was his closest companion and who never had an idea of his own without checking it with Arthur first. C just gaped when Arthur berated him. Then he shook his head worriedly and left. This had gone on long enough. Soon afterwards, C ran into Merlin and demanded that he do something about the matter. "What are you babbling about?" Merlin asked sharply. "You know very well," C replied, flicking his fingers behind his back to ward off the curse in case Merlin was planning to strike him down for his impudence. "Arthur is in love with the daughter of Leodegrance. We can't see why it has gotten no further. There is nothing wrong with the match. Why don't you help him? Talk to her parents or something. Maybe you could have him save her from a dragon." Merlin gave him a glance of contempt. "I already did that, if you recall, or as close as makes no difference." "What makes you think it is such a good match?" "Everyone says so," retorted C. "Everyone? Just who has been discussing this? There isn't a man of his lieutenants who doesn't know how he feels and doesn't wish him well, but he is acting like a fool, and someone has to stop it before he loses their respect. So can't you just get him married so he can get his mind back on important matters?" Merlin swore something that C didn't catch, but C's fingers moved even more frantically than before. He tried to edge away. Merlin didn't seem to be paying him any attention now. He was lost in thought. "Wait a minute," Merlin's voice startled C, who sprang up about 3 feet. "You say that Arthur's men all know about this and approve of it? All right, I don't approve. I think it is an idiotic venture, and that we all will live to regret it. But it seems that everyone, including fate, is fighting me in this. I will do what I can to speed matters, since it seems that this will happen anyways. From now on, however, you will keep your mouth shut about this." "Yes, sir," C gulped, glad to find that he could open his mouth at all. He quickly made his escape, but not without a feeling of having fought a dragon himself and won. He vented his excitement by running up and down all the steps in the castle twice. It was only then that he could calmly go on with his work. That night Merlin had a long talk with Leodegrance, after which Leodegrance had a long talk with Gwynlyn. The consequence was that they sent for Arthur to confer with them as they sat in the courtyard the following afternoon. Spring had blown in gustily that week. The air was still chilly, but inciting, and something about the day was conducive to rash acts. Arthur tried to gain courage from deep breaths of the moist air as he hurried to the meeting. He had seen Guinevere that morning at breakfast, and she had smiled at him and inquired about his health in a tone that had set his heart pounding. He wondered if she had been told yet of his intentions. He was trying to consider what impression he should try to convey about himself to Leodegrance and Gwynlyn. He wanted desperately to be as elegant and assured as they, but had given that up as hopeless. He must somehow convince them that Guinevere would give up nothing in the way of comfort or care by marrying him. He wondered if he could make them believe how much and how truly he adored her. He would have been deeply embarrassed to know how unnecessary that last worry was. His love for Guinevere was so obvious that the only person who hadn't noticed it was Guinevere herself. Well, young man, Leodegrance began in the tone used by all prospective fathers-in-law, I understand that you wish to marry my daughter. Yes, said Arthur, looking miserably at his hands. Can you tell us why we should approve of such an alliance? Arthur didn't look up and see the softening amusement in Leodegrance's expression. He only heard the question, and suddenly all the reasons why he shouldn't marry her came into his head. I know I'm only a crude soldier, he blurted. I have little education, save what Merlin has given me. I don't know how to talk to fine people or to use a napkin. I'm only really comfortable and at ease in a camp preparing for battle and surrounded by those like myself. I am clumsy, and my foster brother C says that I snore. I don't even have a family name to give her. I have come from nowhere, and I am no one. He sank even lower in his seat as he recited his defects. The hopelessness of it crushed him. When he finished, Gwendolyn turned to Merlin. There were sparks of anger in her eyes. You haven't even told him about his family yet, she complained. When is the perfect time? You said you were waiting for your deathbed? What do you mean? Arthur sat up again. My dear Arthur, she said forcefully, I really don't think that any of your dreadful flaws are an impediment to marriage. If Guinevere is upset, she can show you how to use a napkin. This business of your family, however, is another matter. My cousin apparently doesn't think the time is right to tell you the names of your parents. I can't imagine why. You have certainly proved yourself in every way a successor worthy of your father and far more able to mold this poor battered island into a civilized country again. It's cruel for you to be allowed to think you are worthless. Your family is certainly as old and as respected as Guinevere's. You need not worry about that. What I want to know is, 1, do you love her enough to take care of her and protect her no matter what happens? And 2, how does she feel about you? Arthur tried to stammer an answer to her question, but he felt as if someone had just picked him up by the heels and thrown him into a whirlwind. Merlin, what is she saying? Who was my father? Merlin grit his teeth. What this would lead to, he couldn't guess. Was nothing to be left in his hands? Arthur, I said I would tell you someday. You may as well know it all now. You are the son of Uther Pendragon and his queen Igraine. If you feel that you need a legitimate right of inheritance to rule the Britons, there it is. But I wanted you to take the crown on your own merit, without resting on anyone's name or earlier conquests. Uther was obeyed, but not loved. Gwendolyn is right when he says that you will do a far better job than he did. The matter at hand, however, is Guinevere. So you still want to marry her, now that you do not need the grandeur of her name to bolster your authority. What an insane question. Of course I want her. It is I who was not worthy of her. I love her so much, I am afraid even to speak to her, lest I frighten her by shouting out my feelings too soon. Leodegrance gave the boy a look almost of pity. That is something you must overcome soon. I take it, then, that you haven't told her anything. No? Well, we will do that for you. Now, if she is willing, I can see no objection. Can you, my dear? Gwendolyn's smile almost blinded him. I can think of nothing to keep this man from joining our family. If that is what he wishes, I do think that you gentlemen should discuss her dowry, in case Arthur is not satisfied with the little we can offer. I'll not have it said that our daughter could not bring something to her marriage appropriate to her husband's position. Now, if you like, I will go and speak to Guinevere, if you will excuse me. Arthur was fast losing his capacity for clear and decisive thinking. His head seemed to be stuffed with some foggy blue substance, and stars and comets were flashing through his brain. He vaguely knew what Merlin and Leodegrance were haggling over certain parcels of land and the amount of coins, but it was some time before he bothered to attend to them. I don't want any land. I have the site for my city already chosen. It's a fine hill near Glastonbury, Tor. Guinevere doesn't need a dowry. There is nothing you have more precious than she is. But if we must have something, all she needs to bring is the table you have hidden in the cave under your home. What? Leodegrance tensed his jaw. How do you know about that? No one is supposed to know anything about that. Matthew told me long ago. He didn't know much. It is perfectly round and will seat 100 men or more. There are words carved on it, but Matthew never had enough light to decipher them. There is supposed to be some sort of magic connected with it. It is very old, and no one knows how it was put there or where it came from. I put it there, Merlin said in a tired voice, and it came from Uther, at least most recently. The last time he even took my advice was when I told him it was too dangerous to have it about. What do you want it for? Leodegrance waved off Merlin's protestations. I want a symbol for my new society, something exclusive and yet open to all equally. If they could earn a place, ever since I heard of this table, it has drawn me, I think, is what I'm looking for. I see, Leodegrance shrugged his chin thoughtfully. It may be that you are indeed the one that I was to save it for. I must consider this. And without further conversation, he strode off into the darkness of the castle. Arthur looked at Merlin. I suppose you're angry with me, he sighed. No, I'm resigned to anything now, but it does appear that I have a great deal to tell you. Come with me. And they wandered down the narrow path to the beach, and were not seen again until evening. Chapter 17. Gwaelin found her daughter alone in her room. She was sitting balanced on the narrow casement, staring out to sea. Guinevere came up to Guinevere gently and touched her shoulder. Guinevere started and slipped from her perch back to the floor. You startled me, mother. I didn't hear you come in. I could see that. Lost in daydreams? Guinevere shrugged evasively. Not exactly, she hedged. She's slipping away again, Gwaelin worried herself. Marriage will be a good thing for her. She lives too much in another world. Come sit with me, darling. I want to speak with you about something important. Guinevere felt a thrill of apprehension. She couldn't remember anything terrible that she had done lately, but her mother's tone was so serious that she felt sure that she was about to be reprimanded for something and braced to explain herself for whatever it was, so she was a little bewildered by Gwynlin's questions. What do you think of Arthur, dear? Arthur? Yes, you wanted to meet him for years, and now you have. What do you think of him? Guinevere mused for a moment. He's different, she said at last. He always moves as if he knows just where he is going and the best way to get there. He got Mark to come with us when I couldn't even make him talk to me. I think I like him, but he doesn't seem to care for me very much. He doesn't? Why ever do you think that? He won't talk to me. He won't talk with me. Every time I see him, he just mumbles and slides away. Do you think I offended him? Perhaps I didn't thank him properly for saving my life, or maybe he just doesn't feel I would be very interesting to discuss things with. I'm not very well informed on what is happening the way Sidra is. You may be correct, Guinevere, but that isn't the impression I got from him this afternoon. Far from being offended by you, the man appears to be very much in love with you. He has asked your father and me to arrange a marriage between you, if it pleases you. A what? He wants to marry you, my dearest child. How do you feel about that? Gwendolyn watched her carefully. It suddenly occurred to her that, unlike other girls her age, Guinevere had never considered marrying anyone. Guinevere was quiet. At first, she only felt numb, and then cold and a little frightened. She tried to imagine marriage. Her parents liked it well enough. It would be nice to have someone to share things with, to talk to every day, someone who loved her. Then she remembered Gawain and Risa. Her stomach turned. Could she do that? She didn't see how, yet Risa liked it very much. Liked it very well. It was clear that it didn't worry Alswitha. You could see that every time she and Mark were together. One almost felt embarrassed watching them, look at each other. It was so totally private. She wondered if she could feel that strongly about Arthur. I don't know him, Mother, she blurted. She tried to picture Arthur again in her mind and only got a vague impression of strength and excitement. Do you want to know him? Yes, I think I do, Guinevere's answer surprised herself. Then you must make him speak to you. He is only shied of you because he cares for you so much. Let him tell you about himself and his plans. He has many grand dreams, not only for you and for himself, but for all of Britain. If you marry him, you know, you will likely become queen. If she had hoped that would impress Guinevere, she was mistaken. The information seemed to surprise her, and then she laughed. How very odd. Shall I tell him that you wish to see him? If I'm going to marry him, I would like to do that first, she replied without a trace of humor. Within an hour, everyone at the castle had heard the news that Guinevere was engaged to Arthur. Her room was crowded with people fluttering around her, with good wishes and obsequious comments, and she didn't understand. Although she had not made up her mind at all, so many people told her the matter was settled that she began to believe it was. It was not until after dinner that she finally had the chance to talk with Arthur. For the first time, she really studied him. He was tall and strong and handsome, in the clean, chiseled Roman fashion. His normal pale skin had been tanned and roughened by weather and years of campaigning. His tousled red hair had probably once also been lighter, but the same force had deepened it to a rich auburn. His hands, she noticed with satisfaction, were large and yet finely made, with long tapering fingers. She thought of her own stubby fingers and wondered inconsequentially if their children could hope to inherit his. She stood there watching him so long that he flushed with embarrassment and gave her a look of such pure devotion that she smiled at him tenderly. If I'm going to be your wife, Arthur, you really must stand closer to me, she admonished him. Arthur stuttered. I mean, will you? Everyone says so, she answered. Are you certain you want me? Am I certain? He shouted, and then made an effort to modulate his voice. I wanted nothing else since I first saw you. I will be so good to you, I promise. There is so much we can do together. We can make Britain a real country again. We will build a peaceful palace, and everyone in the land will flock to our court just to gaze at you. What a strange thing for them to do. I'm sure I could arrange some better entertainment. Of course, anything you like, Arthur responded. If she had suggested that he travel to Africa for a performing elephant, he would have picked up his sword and gone without a word. Timidly, he reached out his hand and touched her cheek. His fingers were rough like fresh leather, but curiously gentle. She smiled again and whispered, I think I'll enjoy being married to you. Arthur suddenly felt as if the whole world had been laid out before him. He knew without a doubt that he could create a civilization grander than any the world had ever known. He could build cities more glorious than Rome or Jerusalem. He could defeat any foe and then convert them so thoroughly that they would serve him with devotion. The lightness in his head almost convinced him that he could fly. Guinevere thought only, there is something very nice about him. He makes me want to do something for him, like remind him to wear his cloak when it rains. We're going to stop it right here for now. We've been reading Guinevere by Sharan Newman. Again, this book is for sale, still at major book retailers, along with the Chessboard Queen, which is the second book in the series, and Guinevere Evermore, the third book in the trilogy. If you like this content, make sure you like and subscribe and ring the bell so you know when I upload. And if you support me in any way, all that information will be in the description below. As always, thanks for watching, everyone, and have a great day.